So in this video, we're going to show you how to make that cool effect of particles that represent all the colors in my robot figure here come together and then fade that robot character onto the scene. So you're going to need to use all the techniques that I showed in my last video of creating one single bitmap that covers the entire robot mesh in order to do this. So let's get started to see how we're going to go and make this cool effect. What we're going to do is take this robot that we created in Blender, and if you watched my last video, we went through and we created this texture map, basically an image map from our robot, and we created all of our seams. And we created our single image that did a UV map onto our whole mesh. And it's important that there's one bitmap that goes to the entire mesh altogether in order to do the effects that we're going to do in Unity. So what you want to make sure you've done is you've saved your image, and I saved it just to a directory, and then I brought it into Unity, and I'll show that in a minute. And that you have set up your mesh correctly. And let's go into layout 1. Every time I bring a single mesh character into Unity, I always want to make sure that the origin, this little yellow dot there, is in the middle and at the bottom of the feet of your character, just so when you place it in Unity that this is the 0 point. It's just a lot easier. And then you can go in here, you can go to export, VBX. You can see I've already exported it, but I've selected apply transform, apply on lit space transform, and then just export the selected objects. And so I exported that right into my Unity project under assets, and I always have a folder called meshes that I export into. So I've already done that. So now if we come into our Unity project, what I've done is I've dragged our image that we use to map onto our robot in as a separate image, and you need this as a separate image. It is brought back embedded in our mesh. If we go to our robots with full image, we can see this low poly 03. This is the bitmap, and that's embedded in the FBX. And here's our mesh for our robot. And there's actually a couple of animations that I've done before, but these are the important things. But we need this, we need the image separately in order to do our effect. Because what we're going to do is we're going to take and run some particle effects on our mesh and using all of the colors from our bitmap. So the first thing you need to do in order to make this work is to go into here, go into visual effects, go into utilities, and do point cache bake tool. Let's check something for a second. All right. Once you're in here, what you can do is you can select a mesh, and again, the mesh is going to be a different name than the actual name of the character, the whole FBX that you brought in. It's simply the mesh part. And in Blender, you can rename this if you want, but it creates a default name, and in this case, it's this robot 202. And then what you can do is you can create this point map. And what you want to do is to make sure to export normals, colors, UVs. I don't think I'm using the colors but I just selected all three when I made this work. The UVs are going to be used to grab the colors out of our color image. The normals are we're going to use in order to move particles away from the mesh. Because remember, each polygon or each vector, I'm not sure if it's the vector points or the polygons, have a normal which points away from perpendicular from that surface. So if something moves along the normal, it's going to move away from that particular polygon on the mesh, which is what we want to do for some of our effects. So after you click that Save to Point Cache file, it's going to ask you to name it. I've already done that. And what I do is I have this robot body. You just use that default name of the mesh for our point cache map. So now that we've done this, what we can do is we can use this in order to create effects. And what we want to do is we want to create particles on our mesh in order to get certain effects. So I'll work on that next. So the first thing we're going to want to do is take and grab our mesh and put it in our scene. So I will find that robot with full UV bitmap 2. There we go. So if we go to move him just to make sure he's right on our floor, looks good. I'm going to rotate him into the light just so we can see him a little better. This is the angle that I usually have my camera. So here's our robot. We can see that it brought in that image. We can see the circles that we drew on him if you watched my last video. So now what we're going to do is we're going to create a new visual effect. Let's come in here, create visual effect graph, and let's call it robot particles. I'm going to open him up, drag him over here. Actually, we want to make it so we can see everything at once. All right. Now what we're going to do is we're going to grab this robot particles and we're going to drag it into to have it parent by the robot. Let's offset him 0. Oops, that's a scale. So what this does is, and this is why I wanted the origin to be here of my mesh, so it's coming right out of the exact same point that our robot is. And that's important because what we're going to want is all of the particle positions to be relative to our robot. So if he was moving around, the particles would move around. All right. Let's make some space. Shrink him down. So what we're going to do is the first simple thing we're going to do is we are going to create a block and we're going to set position from map. Where is it? I'm going to do sequential. There's a couple ways to do it. You can do it random, constant per particle, or sequential. Sequential, I got a better coverage, but let's just do that. And we have to give it our map. So we're going to create a node. We are going to get our point cache. So we created our point cache from our mesh. So basically the point cache is all the 3D points of all the vertices, I believe, of the mesh map that we created the point cache from, along with their normals and the UVs. And remember, the UVs are the coordinates into the map that it's getting all the colors for. That's the UV map that we created in Blender. So it's grabbed all those and created those and put them in this point mesh. And so now what we can do is, if we set the position from the map, let's get rid of this velocity. We don't need the velocity. And we are going to up the number. Let's make it 500. Let's make this, we'll just make this really big. Just make sure that they live long enough. Keep them alive for 3 seconds. And what we have is, we can see here is the outline of our robot, but it is rotated because our robot is rotated, but the mesh is not. So we have to rotate, and he's a lot bigger, because if we go to our robot here, we can see that he's been scaled and he's been rotated. Let's rotate him 90 exactly. So we need to go in and do the same thing for our mesh. One can come in here. I clicked the wrong key. All right, come in here, copy, paste, paste, paste. You come in here. It's an attribute map. He actually was rotated, but since he's been parented, if he wasn't parented, I'd have to rotate him the same way, but he has been parented. So now you can see all of our particles are right on top of our mesh. So now what we're going to do is let us get rid of that guy. Get rid of that guy for now. Let's set size. Set size is 0.1. That's good. Particle we're going to use is default particle. This guy. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in and we're going to fix this later, but I'm going to hide our actual image here because I don't actually need him. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over here and I'm just going to pick a material that won't show anything. I could have just made a material with no shader to do the same thing, but picking something like that is just as easy. I want them to disappear for now. So what I have is I have all my particles appearing, but the colors are incorrect. So what I need to do is I'm going to need to set the color of my particle. So what we need to do is we need to add a couple things in order to do that. So the first thing we do is we add this set color from map, but we're not going to grab the color. And I'm not sure what the color represents, but the thing is what we need to do is we need to index, take the UV and use the UV in order to take that value and grab the value from our image. Remember, I had to save and bring in the image. This is my robot body image here. And we're going to use that and the UV that is stored in this color value in order to actually set the color. It seems kind of backward. I'm not sure how it would get the color because there is no color in a mesh. There is a UV in the mesh. And I don't know if that's the color index or how you'd use that, but we're going to use the UV here. And what we're going to do is we are going to want to get that color. Because this has the UV from our map for that particular particle. Remember, all these are per particle. So every time a particle is created, it's going to index into this point mesh and in some random way, or in this case, a sequential way. And then it's going to grab that point, and then it's going to grab the UV. It's always going to use the same index, I assume, into that point cache. So what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to sample texture 2D. For some reason, setting the texture just with this never seems to work for me, and I always need to actually create a texture 2D to bring in my texture. So we will bring in our robot body for the texture. We're going to use our color for the UV. Remember, the color is holding the UV because we grabbed the UV from the map there. Then what we're going to do is we are going to set the color with the color that came out of our sample texture. And now we can see that the colors that are up here that's using per particle is correct on the body. We can see that all the yellow areas and the black areas, and these are kind of big. They're kind of appearing and disappearing, but all those are set up correctly. So you can use this just if you want an effect, a sparkly effect on your character. You could make the points slightly larger. Again, if we have that normal, and so if we moved those outside of our image, I'm not going to do that for this video, but you could move those along the normal in order to make them a little bit bigger, so they always show up. Because if you don't do that and your the actual mesh is being rendered, they kind of overlap each other and it doesn't look really great. So what we're going to do now is we are going to use this in order to do a couple effects. So let's take a look at some of those effects. The first one we can do is we could create all of these particles, and then we could shoot them out like say you were going to destroy an enemy, you could actually have them explode out along those normals. So let's take a look at how we would do that. So the first thing we're going to want to do is we're going to want to come up to our spawn, and instead of spawning at a constant rate, what we want to do is we want to just use a single burst. We'll make it a bunch, 2,000. So we can see we got a burst of 2,000 particles. Every time we play this, they will live for 3 seconds. So we don't want them just to sit there and not move. What we want them to do is we want them to move along the normals from our point cache map. So we can do is we can set velocity from map. So what they're doing now is it's just using a noise map. So they're moving at a random motion. But what we want to do is we want to grab this normal instead. So now you can see what happens is they're going to move away using the normal from each point of the mesh. And you can see they will kind of disperse there. We can do is we can come down here. We can say set color. We don't want to use the white. What we just want to do, oops. Oh, actually we wanted to set color over lifetime. Set color over life. We just want to use the alpha. Just want it to kind of fade at the end. We don't want it to fade in the beginning. Actually, I think we just delete that. Turn him to full white. So that goes and then fades away. So obviously it depends on how fast you want your effect to be and how fast you want that velocity to be. You could have it speed up or slow down over time with a map or with a ramp or with a curve or some other math that you're using to modify the velocity. But grabbing the velocity, the basic one, over using that normal is what you want if you want it to kind of explode. The other thing, and it's a little bit trickier, is to actually make the particles start at a random point and then all come together. And I thought that was a cool way of like making a character appear in your scene or a bad guy, that it starts with a cloud of particles and they all come together and their end point is on the mesh instead of their start point. So let's see how we would do that. So in order to do the effect we want to set, we don't want to set the position initially on the mesh. What we want to set is a variable that we can use for the particles to move toward. And so there's a couple that you can use. One handy one is set target position from map. I'm just going to move him up here just for convenience sake. And then we're going to want to take the position and we're going to want to drag him down there. And so we're not going to set the position from the map. We are going to set this target position. And what we're going to do is we want the initial position to be random. And so I could make a custom attribute, but you can use the direction. I've used this before. It's just a variable. It's not set by anybody, and I'm just going to set it random. I'm going to make the x between -5 and 5. This between 5 and 0. This between -5 and 5. So basically it'll make it a cube kind of around my object here. Remember, all these are local coordinates. So the position of my object is the 0 point. And then what we're going to want to do is we want to set the position here. So what we're going to do is we are going to set position. And we want to set the position from a combination of our target position. We want to start it at their target position. If we do get target here, so let's create a node, get target position, and if we fed this into the position, what we would see is we get our robot image. Again, he's too big because we need to take our scale point here and we got to go into, where is that? Set target, paste, paste, paste. There we go. So this will be the end position that we want. And the start position is going to be from this direction. It's going to be a random point surrounding our robot. So, oops, let's get direction. So if we put him into the position, we would see that it is not very random. And if we look at why it's not very random, it is because this needs to be set to per component. That screwed me up for quite a while as I was going through this. So if we say play, we can see that it's in a cloud kind of all surrounding our image. It's not very bright there. But though it's going to be a random set of points. And that's why it always helps when I'm going through this just to make sure that the starting values are all what we want. But now what we're going to want to do is we want it to go and we want it to move from our direction to our target. I'm just going to rearrange these because it always helps me to think it's going from the top down to the bottom. And so what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to create a lerp component because we want to do a linear interpolation right between the two of these. So it's going to go from here. So at 0, it's going to be the direction. At 1, it's going to be our position on our mesh. And we want to control this with a sample curve. And of course, we need our time component, or age over lifetime. I don't know why they don't just combine these, because you're always forever feeding this into that. Feed in this into that. And what we want this curve to look like, this is going to control the motion. So at time 1, we're going to want it to be 1. And what I want it to do, there we go. And what I want is I want it to go up fairly quickly, and then I want it to flatten out. Because I want it to be on my robot for some period of time so we can kind of see the image all come together before the particles disappear. Because remember, this is going to move as soon as the particles hit this point here, they're going to disappear. All right, now we can use this to set the position. And if we go here to play, you can see it does exactly what we want. It's starting at that cloud and then all coming together on our robot. So now really what you want to do is, if you want your character to appear, what you wanted to do is as the particles fade out, you want the image of your, or the rendering of your robot to fade in so it looks like he was created from the particles. And we can up the number of particles. We could add a shader to make them glow a bit, to make them brighter in order to get a better effect. But this is really the heart of our effect, is it's moving from a random spot. You could also have them move from a single point. You could have them move along a path that's fancy. I was even thinking I use my tornado, if you watched that video, and have it come in as a tornado and then move from that tornado and all come into my character. There's lots of things you can do to control those particles before they all kind of come together onto our mesh. This is just the simplest way, but I still think it's pretty cool. I'm going to work on to see if I can get that our image to fade in by making a shader on our object and see what that looks like. All right, so I put together what I wanted to do, which is a very simple example of kind of fading in our robot after our particles kind of come together. And I'm just going to go over it quick. To do it justice, I'd really have to do a whole other video because there's really no way to link that I can see triggering the shader fade in from a VFX graph. So what I'm going to do is kind of show you what I did. So first of all, I just made a super simple shader here. I have a noise detail that I can set. And then I'm going to take the noise, add 1. So it's going to be between 1 and 2. I'm going to subtract some amount. So if I subtract 2, it will totally fade away. And then I'm going to clamp that to make sure it's between 0 and 1. And I'm going to feed that into my alpha. Nothing too fancy. I've done several other shader videos doing similar things. And then I'm going to externalize that subtract amount and noise detail. But I'm really only going to use that subtract amount. Then on my robot particles, what I did is I modified this a bit. I had added this sample curve for setting the size. And what I do is I start at 0.1 and then over the course of a second, I'm going to go up to 0.3. So as they come in, they're going to grow to cover more of the robot until they fade away. And then what I did is I had to make a script to actually pull this all together. So I'll show that now. And again, it's just a lot of hard-coded numbers, just a really simple example. But really what I want is I want to start fading in my robot after the particles have already kind of descended onto our robot and grown bigger. And as they grow bigger, I want to start fading in my robot. So I have a couple constants. I always make my constants all caps. And you really have the start time, meaning how much am I going to, actually the amount total is the amount I'm going to subtract off. It's starting at 2. The start time is how many seconds after I start the VFX graph of my particles running. So after 2 seconds, I'm going to start fading in. I have a Boolean here. That's just I'm gonna trigger to start the fade in. Fade in amount is gonna start at 2 and then it's gonna go down to 0. And once it hits 0, then the robot will be fully visible, and we have a flag that says that the particle system has started. So what I do is I trigger it off the space bar. So when I hit the space bar, I am going to start my visual effect plane. So this is basically how I can get it. My game object is my robot, and I have my VFX graph as a child under that. So I'm just going to get the first child, and then I'm going to get the component of that, and the visual effect is a component of that child of the VFX graph. And once I have that visual effect, I can just call play on it, and that will start my actual VFX graph running. So it'll start those particles coming in toward my robot, and then I set my flag that the particles have started. if my particles have started, I start a countdown. I keep adding up the current time until the time is big enough so that it's greater than my fade in start time, which is 2 seconds. And I am not faded in. I don't want to keep resetting this over and over and over again. So if I'm greater than that 2 seconds, I'll start the fade in true. If I'm starting the fade in true, what I'm going to do is I'm going to subtract off my current fade in amount, and I am going to take my renderer, which I grabbed up here. So what I did is my game object again is my robot. I'm grabbing the renderer class off of that, and that has a function which is shared material. So shared material is a copy of the material, and that's used so you don't actually change the actual root material or the material that could be shared between objects. It's going to be a copy of it just for this object. And then I do a set float, and I use the subtract amount to my current fade amount. And if we look, that underscore subtract amount, we go back to our shader, that's this name. This reference is the text string that you use in your code in order to access that external variable, that subtract amount. So once we do that, if we run play, it will build here quick. It always runs through once. And now if I hit the space bar, it's going to run that. It's going to all collapse in, grow bigger, and then fade in my robot. So in this way, you can obviously make a lot cooler effects. Again, you could make all those particles be a tornado. You could make them kind of snaking along the floor and then kind of going to its spot and then kind of erupting from the floor onto him. There's lots of different things you can do. Basically, you're just running whatever VFX graph you want for whatever length of time you want, and then at the right trigger point or after X number of seconds, you are starting to fade in your character once it's all covered with your particles. So I hope this helped you think of some cool things you could do with this for your own games, and you can see how using that whole bitmap and breaking it up into particles, we can make some pretty cool effects. So thanks for watching this video, and keep tuned to my channel. It is getting to be summertime, and hopefully I'll put together one more. I might try some cool other particle effects for kind of some entrance and get a little more fancy than what we showed today. But what we showed today really is the basics. And given that, I think it's enough for you to kind of experiment on your own. So we'll see you next time.